Do you want to become a CFO and take control of your career? Our AXR podcast series from Go to CFO will give you a unique insight into what it takes to become a successful CFO, hosted by myself, Dave Goldback, and my colleague, Kunal Gupta from AXR Recruitment and Search. We speak to inspiring and successful CFOs from our network across Australia. They share their career journeys with us and with you. The closest thing you're going to get to delving into the mind of a CFO. We hope you enjoy it.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our From Go to CFO series. I'm one of your co-hosts, Kunal Gupta, an Associate Director at AXR Recruitment and Search, specializing in senior accounting and finance recruitment. And today we have with us Nick Williams, the CFO of Tellus Holdings, who has kindly volunteered his time and expertise to share his career journey with us. So welcome, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
No, absolute pleasure. Well, Nick, would you like to kick off by maybe doing a quick introduction about yourself?
Sure.
For the audience?
Yeah, no problem. So born and raised in Melbourne, and I stayed there until I got through uni, basically, and embarked on the career journey, which took me all around the world, and now settled back here in Sydney with my lovely wife, who's from Brazil, one of the places I lived in, and a couple of young kids.
Nick, that sounds really interesting. Would you like to maybe share, how your career started and, those early days?
Yeah.
And you certainly, worked in a few different countries as well. So I'd love to explore that a bit with you.
Sure. Yeah. So I started with, it was interesting coming out of uni, probably having, majored in accounting. I was looking at the Big Four and actually had landed a role with one of the top accounting firms in Melbourne. And the girl I was going out with at the time actually was exploring graduate opportunities at BHP. And I hadn't really thought about going into industry. It just hadn't come across my mind. But because she was looking at it, I actually had a look myself, and I was like, oh, hang on, this is kind of interesting. It was, it was a 3-year graduate program. It was going to be in 3 different places, doing 3 different roles. And it was paying more, by the way, which I remember, I think it was, $30,000 annually, which seemed like a lot of money at the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, I thought, that sounds pretty interesting. I might have a go at that. And I ended up getting the role with BHP, which was, in retrospect, I'm so happy I made that change, because that graduate program, it was discontinued right towards the end of my time there. They may have started something new, but it was fantastic. I mean, in terms of getting a broad base understanding of different areas of finance, I did some time in management accounting. I did some, pure sort of financial accounting and other bits and pieces along the way. It was a great starting point.
Yeah.
And then also the opportunity to travel.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Nick, day one for most employees in a company is usually coming in, they're setting up with a laptop, send you a bunch of training and, programs to do, and maybe a few coffees during the day, and you ease into your job.
Yeah.
What was day one like for you?
Yeah, day one was a bit of a shock. So I arrived into the Melbourne office, and they got us all in a room, all the graduates for the year, and they said, right, guys, you're all moving to Adelaide. I said, right. Adelaide, because I'd had in my mind that, yeah, we're going to move around on this course, but, I'd been thinking like London, have San Francisco offices, and then day one, I was told I was moving to Adelaide. And look, I don't want to knock Adelaide, because I actually ended up having a fantastic time there, and I think it's a great city, but it was a little bit of a shock. So, yeah, within a few weeks, they were opening up a new shared services office there.
Okay.
And we basically were assigned, a person to learn the job of that was currently working in the Melbourne office. And we were going to take that finance role and move it to the shared services centre in Adelaide. So it was rough. I was 21. I probably looked about 15. I was assigned to a bloke who was in his late 50s, probably bordering on retirement. And effectively I was being put there to learn his job. And I was really lucky. He was really respectful and very kind to me and made it easy for me. There are some others in the group who weren't so lucky. People were being made redundant out of this. So, it was easy for them to be kind of bitter about it. But, I guess it was all about being respectful and trying to be empathetic to the person that you were learning from. which I hopefully managed to do. And then, within a few weeks, I was 21 years old, having to find a place in Adelaide. I hadn't lived out of my house before, so it was a big change, but a great opportunity.
Yeah. And that seems to be a bit of a recurring theme in your time at BHP, where there's been opportunities that have been presented to various team members, including yourself. And your mindset or your view on how you've shaped that. Talk us through maybe a couple of key other changes then after Adelaide.
Yeah.
What happened and what was your thinking around it, and any advice you would give to someone, in their early stages of their careers or maybe even mid stages of their career on, how to keep learning, developing, growing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess I've always had the mentality. It was something uncle of mine used to say, who was, got to be quite senior at Bankers Trust back in the day. He used to say, if someone was offering a piece of work or an opportunity or a project, just put your hand up and say yes. Like, there's just nothing to lose. What the worst case is, you could end up with a whole lot more work and you'll be able to work through that. But the best case is you get new opportunities. You broaden your experience, you grow your network. And so I guess I kind of took that mentality on right from the start. And so when opportunities came up to move into new roles or to do new projects, I just always put my hand up and said yes. So, from Adelaide, there was a role over in Houston that was, again, it was in a shared services center. And I was probably thinking, shared services to shared services. Am I going to pigeonhole myself here a little bit, pigeonhole myself? But no, I just said, yes, let's go. And again, fantastic, broadened my base, met a whole lot of new people and ended up working in the oil and gas area of the shared services. So I learned a whole new, I'd moved away from the mining in BHP into the oil and gas. So I did get something out of that. Similarly, I got back to Melbourne after 2 or 3 years of moving around, did a year in the petroleum group in Melbourne. And then I was like, I want to try something new again. I want to travel again. And an opportunity came up in Holland. And it was in corporate finance and treasury, which I had a bit of an interest in, to be honest. I'd kind of done a few years of accounting and I thought, corporate finance treasury is an interesting area.
Yeah.
So, and there was the bonus of getting over to Europe. So, I went for that role and I got that role and I moved over to Holland. I ended up spending 4 years living in The Hague. I couldn't have pointed The Hague out on a map to you, when I went for the role, but it turned out to be fantastic. And I think that, actually that concept of just putting your hand up and trying new things is something you can take all the way through your career. I don't think it's something that you do early on. I think it's something that you just keep doing because there's very, very rarely is there a downside to it. You're going to learn something or meet someone new. Yeah. So, that's something I'd definitely encourage people to do right the way through their career.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so critical. Having that mentality to put your hand up, for different assignments, whether it be challenging assignments. Often it's the hardest ones that, come to you.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, would you want to consider it?
Yeah.
And if you're able to turn that around and make that a success, what that does for your self-confidence, your brand, your learning, your development, it's 100% really impactful, isn't it?
And I think of it now with the shoe on the other foot as a more senior person. The people that I see putting their hands up are the ones I want to be employing, keeping in my team. That's the right attitude to be illustrating. So I can see it from the other side now. It's just what you want to see in a young person or an employee is kind of intrigue and interest in doing new things.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And as you were going through your career, it seems like to some degree there's some conscious decision making involved with putting your hand up into opportunities where you have potential gaps or, you haven't been exposed to, like, with the corporate and the treasury role in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Is that something you were really conscious of when you were taking on assignments to go, hey, look, I haven't actually worked in that space before. That seems quite interesting. Let me take that on. Or did it just happen by chance?
No, I think I was conscious of it. I didn't shy away from stuff like the example of the shared services. That could have been a bit of an overlap. As it turned out, it was in a totally different industry, so it had new learnings. But I think I was conscious to keep trying to find new things. And, an old boss of mine used to talk about, having a pyramid of your career, and what you need to do is be, building the blocks, filling out the pyramid and putting the bricks all along the layers until you can build it right up and have a full pyramid. And I think, so I had it in the back of my mind. It's ideally you're trying new things, you meet new people, new networks, and that'll help you along your career because you'll become a better rounded person, gives you better opportunities.
Yeah. Okay. And talking about new networks, have you, during your time when we spoke about this before as well, you mentioned that there were a couple of influential individuals, or maybe one in particular, that, had a pretty big impact in your career.
Yeah.
Talk us through that, and then how that then shaped, a couple of moves.
It was an interesting start, and to someone who ultimately ended up becoming probably the most influential mentor in my career. So I was, at this point, I'd been 3-4 years over in the Treasury corporate finance team in Holland. Mm-hmm. And a role came up for VP finance over there. I'd moved my way up to sort of manager level by this point, and I thought I was ready. I thought, this is my opportunity here. I was still probably only 27, and in retrospect, I absolutely wasn't ready, but I certainly thought that I was. So I applied for the role, and BHP did the right thing. They put me through the process. Yeah, and I missed out on the role. And so, fine, the guy who got the role shows up, and he's now my boss. And it was this guy, a guy called Fernando Salek. He'd come up from the Brazilian office in BHP, and he'd been working in treasury and corporate finance down there. And he actually had a pretty good CV. But I guess I was a little bit, bitter about having missed the role. And I probably, certainly in his first few days there, he sensed that I wasn't, maybe myself, I wasn't, having a very super positive attitude. And, this is a great example. He's a great people person and a great communicator. And I think the best example of it was within the first week, he pulled me into his office and just sat down and said, look, let's put it all on the table. Like, a kind of sensing that something's not quite right. I'm not getting a great feeling attitude from you in these first few days here, et cetera. I'd really like to work with you, but let's talk about it. What's the problem? And it was pretty confronting because, to be honest, I had to say to him, well, I wanted your job and I'm pretty disappointed I didn't get it. And, I'm not sure that you're any better than I am, for example. Yeah. And anyway, we had a really open, that was what was going through my mind. Yeah. And in retrospect, he was far more experienced and he did have a lot more background and experience. So it was totally, unfounded, but I guess that's what I was feeling. And we had that very open and honest conversation. And he was understanding and empathetic, and he definitely was able to illustrate that, he'd done a lot of time and he'd worked at a lot of different businesses and had a lot of experience, and he'd like to help me to grow into that role in the future. That was his goal. Yeah. And man, I walked out of that room like a different person. I couldn't be angry at the guy. Yeah. He'd done everything he could possibly do to build a new relationship with me and been really open and honest. And that was the start of what ended up being a really impactful relationship for the next few years.
Yeah, wow. Okay. And I think there's a big lesson there as well, where he, given how skilled he was and astute he was on picking up different signals from people, he dealt with it head on rather than letting it simmer. And, kudos to him and credit to you that, the feedback was well received, and it started really positive relationship from there. Yeah. So how did the next couple of years then pan out? Yeah. From there, and
so we worked together for a couple more years there in Holland, and then the whole office got moved over to London actually, and we did about another year and a half. So in the end, it was 4.5 years or so that I'd been in the Treasury corporate finance team. And an opportunity came up down in Santiago in Chile, in the copper area of the BHP group. And it was a treasury role. It was a kind of a somewhat autonomous treasury manager role for the Escondida copper mine down there, which had its own credit rating and issued its own bonds and that kind of thing. So interesting role. Yeah. But I was pretty, of all of the moves that I'd done, going down to South America on my own seemed like a big move. And I was probably having some doubts about whether I should go for it or not. But he him being from Brazil and knowing Chile well, he really encouraged me. He said, you're absolutely ready for this role. This is what you've been building for. This is another step, in your career. And he said, of all the places to go in South America, Chile is the right place to start. It's South America light, let's say. It's got less crime, it's got more infrastructure, it's got more health, it's got, it's like actually a great place to start off.
Yeah.
And he subsequently told me he sort of planned it all along, but he was really keen for me to get over to Brazil and for us to work together in the future. And he thought his way of doing that was getting me down to Brazil, to Chile. So I went and took that role, and again, just, no regrets, met some great people, picked up some Spanish, learned all about the copper mines,
Yep.
a new industry again that I'd never, and got much closer to the assets because I'd been in very corporate roles up until then.
Okay.
So I think that got me out onto the mine sites in the high vis, having to, interrogate some of the data direct from the mines and that sort of thing. So I think that added not only the experience of being in South America and language and culture, that's something else you got to deal with when you're moving around to different countries.
Yep.
But also having to understand operational data and being closer to things like health and safety, which, in the corporate offices nowadays get some more focus, but back in the day, that was a thing in the mines,
Right.
So I think that was a great learning and great experience. So really happy he pushed me down there. And then sure enough, a couple of years later, there were some restructures happening within BHP. And he'd subsequently left and gone back to Rio, and I was looking for my next role, and I spoke to him and he said, "Hey mate, I've just landed the role as CFO of BG Brazil, and we've got an opportunity for you. I want you to come over to Rio."
Right.
So
But you had something else.
I did
as an option as well. Was it Singapore?
Yeah, Singapore. Yeah. So there was a role with people from BHP that listen to this will remember. There was a massive project called OneSAP, which was to roll out a one accounting system one system right across the world for BHP. And so there was a OneSAP role in Singapore, and I was tossing up. They were both available at the same time. It was kind of, into the stick with BHP. I'd been there 11 years by this point, or cut the umbilical cord and go over to Brazil, which again, was kind of daunting. New language again.
Yeah.
Didn't really know anyone except Fernando over there.
Yeah. It's a big call.
Yeah, and my brother was living in Singapore, so I kind of I was really torn. But in the end, his pitch to me was a very good one. This was 2012. He said, "Well, look," he said, "in 2014 we've got the World Cup soccer, which is very relevant at the moment.
Yeah. In
2016 we've got the Olympics," and he said, "You're going to meet your wife here." I said, "Wow, that's a big call, but that's a pretty good pitch." So I said, "Okay, I'm going. I'll go to Brazil." And
he knew your draw cards.
He knew, and 5 years in Brazil, it all played out. The whole thing played out, and I had the most fantastic time. Very, very influential. He really, like I said at the start, he's a great people person. He went on to be CEO of a large listed business in Brazil. Super successful career. He's just recently retired, but incredible mentor for me, pushed me beyond my comfort zone for sure, by encouraging me to take on what looked to be difficult roles, challenging roles in challenging circumstances, but equally encouraged and facilitated, because we'd done some great work together in BHP, and he recognised he liked working with me. There was a healthy level of trust there. He was very big on being able to trust the people in your team. I mean, that was fundamental for him. So that kind of ended up being the best part of 10 years that we were working together.
Yeah. And what was his, when you talk about trust, and that's so important when you're leading a business, is what was his definition of it? Because people do make mistakes along the way. They continue to learn, grow through that. So when there were errors or mistakes that would happen, or someone's just made a poor decision on something, how was that handled? What did you learn from it?
He was all about people learning, and mistakes were absolutely not only tolerated but almost encouraged. But as long as you handle them in the right way, trust with mistakes is about being honest that they've been made and doing your best to try to fix them. That'd be an example of what he would see as trust. Mate, the mistake itself is absolutely fine. It's part and parcel of learning. I think having people in your team that you trust, for him, was so important. He wanted to be able to, he was a big thinker. He didn't want to have to be worried about what was happening within his team. He wanted to be able to he used to talk about filling the gap with trust. when you don't know where someone is because they're not at their desk, rather than thinking, oh, this guy's like gone off to a cafe and he's having fun with his mates or something, you think, he's probably in a meeting. There's stuff like that where there's gaps that you just don't know exactly what's going on in someone's life. It can be personal life, can be professional life. And you fill that gap with trust. And it has to be earned. But after you get it, then it's just such a fantastic working environment.
Yeah.
And that was what he was big on.
Right. Wow. Okay. And then fast forwarding to, you returning to Australia.
Yeah.
What triggered that? And then what was the experience like for you returning back in the country? And, often, and for a lot of our listeners as well, they've gone through that journey themselves or are going through it at the moment where, they're returning or moving to Australia, and it's not always easy. There's, particular challenges in this special environment. Talk us through what that was like for you.
Yeah, I mean, the decision to come back to Oz was really a personal one. I'd got married. By that point, BG had been purchased by Shell. So I'd gone through a long period, and it was a difficult period where, going through an acquisition, not knowing if you're going to have a role in the future in the new business. And, to Shell's credit, actually ran a very fair process where everyone had to reapply for their roles. And so everyone got a shot. And I was lucky enough to get a pretty good job. I stayed about a year, and it just didn't work out for me at Shell. Like I just felt like it was so big, and I struggled a little bit with, there were a lot of committees. There was quite a lot of bureaucracy, and I understand why big businesses need to build those controls. But it was funny because I'd come from, I'd worked at BHP, which is it's also a big business, but I really felt it more in Shell. And after about a year there, I was prepared to say, look, this one just isn't for me, this business.
Yeah.
And equally from a personal perspective, I'd been out for nearly 15 years traveling around, and I thought I should probably, get back and see my family a little bit. So I started looking for work, and it was tough. It was really tough looking for work. I didn't want to move back with a new wife and not have a role. So my big plan was find a role, then move back. So I started looking, and, a lot of recruiters actually weren't very interested in talking to you. If you're employed in a country, I was in Brazil, it's not like I'm in New Zealand. I was a long way away. And a lot of people were just like, look, give me a call when you get back. Then we'll sit down and have a coffee. And look, this wasn't supposed to be an AXR plug, but AXR was actually one of the businesses that did, one of the Gregs, I can't remember which one of the early Gregs.
Greg McKinsey.
Greg McKinsey was the one who took the early call and set up a Skype call, Skype pre-COVID and all of that. It wasn't even that common. And we sat down and had a really good chat. And I think he helped out. Ultimately, I didn't find the role through him, but it was great to have some connection back in Oz. And ultimately, I ended up more through network than through recruiters. I managed to find something. Again, network is just so important. And I think I'd done a reasonable job of keeping up my network back in Oz, even through my travels. I think it's far easier today than it was at the start of my journey, because now with WhatsApp and, so much easier. Back then it was as emails and in the best times to try and get people. But I'd done a reasonable job. And I think for me, networking, it's critical to be keeping in touch with people when you don't need anything from them, right? Like and that so sounds, true. It's not you don't want to be calling them the day that you want to ask them for something. You want to speak to them and keep in touch with them and ask how they're doing, ask how their family's doing. And I don't want to make it sound like every friendship or career relationship is transactional, because it's absolutely not. It's also great just to keep in touch with people.
Yeah.
But the benefit of just reaching out, every now and again to people and saying, hey, how you doing, is the time that you do actually want to discuss something with them. It's not that they haven't heard from you for 10 years.
Yeah.
And I think I was lucky enough that I'd done that with enough people. And I, through an old BHP contact, I was put onto a role that was coming up, and I managed to land a role at Pacific National. So that was my trip back, and that was how I've ended up in Sydney.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's so true when it comes to networking. And we say the same thing to, people we meet in the market, which is, keep that as part of your weekly routine. That should actually be a part of your job, is making sure that you are staying connected with your network and not just solely focused on your regular role.
Yeah.
There's a lot of leaders I've spoken to who set aside time every week to genuinely just pick up the phone and talk to people, just check in or attend an event here and there.
Yeah.
Which is, as you said, you never know when you need someone or when someone needs you.
Yeah.
And that's, we're human at the end of the day. Like, that's one of the joys of, working professionally, where we can help each other and continue to grow.
And I think most people want to help in the end. It's a bit the same with now in the role at Tellus. We're a small business and we're all salespeople. And I work a lot with the head of sales, and he always says, people like to help other people generally. I'd say, as a general rule. So, if you're not asking unreasonable things of people and they can help you out, they're gonna try and do it. So if you can keep your relationship up, and then the day that you want to ask them something that you're familiar to them, that makes a huge.
Yes. Okay. So where we're at is you're at Pacific National now.
Yep.
Or at least at this stage of the story, you're at Pacific National, and you've gotten that through, at least the kickoff of the conversation came through a connection.
Yes.
Yeah. Talk us through your time there. How did things go in the business?
Yeah.
And how did that then result into, your move to Tellus?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting time at PN. They had been bought by private equity. So this was my first, I'd been working in large listed. So that was a good opportunity for me to see how private equity works. They were going through restructures. It was pretty unsettling for a little bit there, I would say. And ultimately, probably, I don't think I'm giving too much away when I say that, that the top line didn't grow as quickly as the investors had hoped. So that did mean then have a knock-on effect to, managing the bottom line. Costs were really held really, really tightly. And it was a bit of an eye-opener, because probably in the large listed land, I don't think you see that level of scrutiny. And so I think it was a great experience for me to go into private equity. It got me into a head of finance role. And I think, up until then, I'd been, as I said earlier, kind of filling the bricks on that pyramid and just trying lots of new things. And I'd ended up doing a bit of FP&A. I'd done lots of treasury and corporate finance. I'd done, management accounting and other forms of accounting. So I'd kind of ticked those boxes at the basic level. But then I think it was when I was coming back and looking for that role that I really started focusing on getting to a CFO. And I was like, if I need to come back at the right level, because I've been out for so long and I've done all these different things, but I come back in at a level that's one step down from head of finance. It's going to be still a very long road before I can get up to CFO. So I think I started really focusing in on that, like the reporting into a CFO. Yeah. That was I think a lot of people talk about, have you always been focused on being a CFO? For me, it wasn't. I was happy to try a bunch of different things, and even did some semi-commercial roles. And I could have gone down that route, but I think it was at that point I'd gone, right, now it's my time. Try to get that role that's reporting into a CFO.
Yeah.
And that head of finance role came up at PN, and that was great. I was working in the coal, head of finance for the coal department, and it was an incredible business, actually. So that got me into that stepping stone there at PN, and that ultimately was what helped me get the role at Tellus.
Yeah. So the pyramid's really starting to build now.
Yeah.
And fall into place. And then you get headhunted by an executive search practice.
Yeah. That was an interesting one.
Yeah.
So I'd been 3 years at PN, and I'd started having a look around to see what was out there, because I felt like I wasn't far off being able to land at least an entry level CFO role.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd put the feelers out, and there was a lady who'd worked at PN and had subsequently left. I'd always got along well with her. Actually, she'd put her hand up to help mentor me on a particular project that we were working on. So I had regular catch-ups with her. She was an intelligent person. I think she had a lot of really positive things about her. And I maintained a good relationship with her, even when maybe not everyone in the finance team was making an effort to do that. And, this is where probably the lesson in this one is just you never know who's going to become a referee of sorts for you in the future, sometimes without you even realizing.
Yeah. Because
I maintained a good relationship with her. And one day, 6 months after she'd left, I was at PN still looking around, and I got a call from her on my phone. I'm like, it's weird that I haven't had a call from her in a long time. I wonder how she's doing. Took the call and she's like, are you out in the market? Like, are you kind of looking for work? And I said, I kind of wasn't sure how to answer because I wasn't sure exactly where she was going with it.
Yeah.
But I said, kind of, having a look around a little bit. And she said, well, I'm just over at an executive search firm and I'm going for a role myself there. And they spotted that you and I had both worked at PN and they just kind of casually asked whether I thought you'd be a good fit for a CFO role at this waste business. And yeah, I sang your praises. So, expect a call. And I was like, oh, wow, thanks. That's fantastic. And I hung up the phone and literally within 5 minutes, I had a call from that search firm. And that it sort of all moved pretty quickly. I hit it off with the CEO on the first interview, who was a young guy, first-time CFO, a lot of energy. I've learned a lot from him over the last 5 years. He's, taught me a huge amount as well, and we've learned a lot together. But I guess the lesson for me for that one is you never know who might help you and who might not in your careers, and really just being respectful to people all the way through.
Yeah.
No matter what other people have said, you need to make your own judgments on whether people are good or bad or kind or not, and not just listening to others. So I think that was something that I've always sort of prided myself on is giving everyone a chance. And I think, in that particular case, it certainly helped me out.
Yeah. That's a big lesson there, because it's often, when it's easy to do when the relationships are comfortable, but it's when it's not, when there is a little bit of tension, within business units or with individuals, to still maintain that strong relationship and be respectful. It really makes a massive difference to people's careers. Yeah. And then not everyone realizes it because they get caught up in the moment and in the situation, which runs over a period of time, So
it's hard to be different in a way. If everyone's saying, oh, this person's no good, for you to actually sit there and go, you know what, I don't mind her. I think she's actually pretty good. That's kind of hard.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately that's what you got to do. You got to make your own calls and not be influenced by others.
So true. Okay. And you've been at Tellus
5 years.
5 years now, ever since. So for the benefit of the audience, maybe share, what the business is about. Would love to know more.
Yeah.
And then we can talk a little bit just on your journey with the business as well, from a new CFO to an experienced one now.
Yeah, sure. So Tellus is a hazardous waste facility. We've got Australia's only geological repository, which can take all of Australia's worst types of waste. What's really interesting is that Australia actually produces more hazardous waste per capita than any other country in the world, which kind of blows people's minds. But we've got a lot of heavy industry here. We've got a lot of mining. We've got a lot of oil and gas.
Yeah.
So
you don't see that in the Tourism Australia.
No. But I guess the founder back 15 years ago of Tellus, he decided that Australia needed a world-class hazardous waste facility to safely and sustainably manage hazardous waste. And we really didn't have one. And the practices in Australia, even as recent as 10 years ago, were pretty poor. So Tellus opened up Sandy Ridge, the operating asset. It's in the goldfields over in WA. I found an incredible piece of geology that's perfectly built for this style of facility. And we've been growing over 5 years. We've had good years and bad years. It was, I think some people would say the founder looked at it as a bit of a field of dreams, sort of we'll build it and they will come. It didn't quite play out like that. We built the facility, and then, I think at that point we realized, wow, we're really disrupting the waste industry.
How so?
Well, we had a new service that had never been offered before, and people for decades in Australia had been doing certain things with their waste. And all of a sudden, with the ESG push and the sustainability reporting and the EPAs putting more pressure, people were having to do something that was probably harder and more expensive with their hazardous waste than they'd had to do in the past. And that was hard for them to swallow, because when you've been paying nothing or next to nothing for decades, and then all of a sudden you've got to pay to get rid of that stuff, it's like, oh, this is no good. I didn't put this in any of my models. So, it's been about changing behaviors of clients. And look, for the most part, I'd say people want to do the right thing for the most part. But it's been an interesting journey over 5 years. I've certainly got a few battle scars as a CFO coming out of this role. I think maybe a bit similar to my time in Holland. I thought I'd filled all those bricks in the pyramid and I was absolutely ready for a CFO role. When I got into the CFO role, I realized there was actually a lot more to it than I'd probably given credit for. But that doesn't mean that you can't learn. It's just about throwing yourself in and learning it. And over the 5 years, we've had a couple of periods where we got within a couple of payrolls of running out of cash, and we had to find ways through covenants and we had to negotiate with debt holders. And we've got a lot of very, very patient shareholders out there who are waiting. It's not a listed business. It's a public unlisted business. So there's not a lot of liquidity. So we're really working hard towards trying to provide some liquidity to our shareholders. And I have to say I'm very, very appreciative of their patience through this period. But we're starting to grow. And I think, the years of kind of banging away about this is the right thing to do to everyone, this is a sustainable and a really good solution for you. People are slowly seeing those behaviours change, and we're going to have a good year now at the end of FY26. We've got a great pipeline for 27. So, it's been an incredible journey for me. Like, I didn't have any grey hair before I started. You're not everyone on the podcast can see, but I've got a few now. It's certainly tested me a little bit, but I wouldn't change anything for the world. And huge thank you to my CEO back then for giving me a crack as a first-time CFO.
Yeah.
That was a big one.
Look, meaningful change is hard, but it absolutely sounds like something which is well worthwhile. Yeah. And, I can tell the passion coming through, in you about the business and what it stands for. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about, that journey in that first year or two. A lot of CFOs I speak to, they say that first year or two as a new CFO is often the hardest. And if you can get through that, then, you start learning, growing, developing, and consolidating your position from there.
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you? Was it a bit of a shock? You did say that, hey, you thought you were ready, but there were certain things there you go, whoa. So what were the shocks? How did you deal with them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, it was a bit of a shock. I think first thing I realised I had to do was look at the team that was supporting me. There'd been some people that had been with the business for quite some period and through really a development stage before we'd hit operational phase and signing contracts and getting revenue. And I could see pretty early on that there were some changes needed there. So that's always hard. You come in and you're trying to get to know everyone. You're trying to understand everyone's capabilities. And when I saw some gaps early on, they just had to be, they had to be managed. And so that's always a tough period. And there's some tough conversations with people at that time.
Yeah.
But without the strong team and without a team that you can absolutely trust, coming back to that word, there was no way I was setting myself up for success. So, and I was lucky enough to have a couple of very loyal employees who'd worked with me in PN that I managed to lure over to work with me at Tellus, and they're still with me today. And I thank them because they make me look good. But so that was the first thing. And that was the first time I'd come in and had to assess a team on my own, assess their capabilities, and then act and make changes. That's that sort of autonomy you're probably not afforded when you're in different roles further down the chain at bigger businesses. So that was a big step.
Yeah.
And then the second one was probably a pretty company specific one, was that I came in and we were in the middle of having to refinance our debt, which was for the business was a huge amount of debt. And we didn't really have any contracts behind us. All we had was about the size of the market and that this was a great concept.
Right.
But, debt holders don't normally lend based on concepts.
Yeah.
So it was a really tough, thrown in the deep end first 4 months getting up to speed. And, whilst I'd worked in treasury and corporate finance, doing a loan in BHP or issuing bonds in BHP is very different to doing it at a Tellus, where at a small growing business. And that was probably
because
huge.
You're pitching the idea, you're pitching the concept.
Well, I had to become a salesman. I think at BHP and companies like BHP, you don't have to sell as much because a lot of people already know about the business, and you've got credit rating, you've got all those things behind you.
Yeah.
When you go into a smaller business, and something I'd actually encourage, aspiring CFOs not to shy away from. Gee, you can learn a lot at a smaller business. Like you get a much broader remit. Like this sort of example, you can't rely upon reputation and credit ratings and all those sorts of things. You're out there selling the contracts, the revenue that's coming, the concept. You become part of the sales team in that respect. And that was what I had to learn on the fly in Tellus. And that was a huge learning curve. And I learned a lot from my MD at the time. Nate Smith, he was fantastic. He taught me a lot through that period, helped me a lot. And I think he knew as a first-time CFO, I'd been thrown in the deep end. I think he appreciated that. He was a first-time CEO, but he'd done a lot of BD and sales. So he was good at that. And, between the two of us, we got that loan done. And through that period, I changed the team. And by the time I got to the end of that year, I started early in the year. By the time I got to the end of that first calendar year, I was like, gee, I'd learned a lot, and it was such a rich experience. And I've continued learning since then, but that was a great way to start and a great advertisement for having a crack at a role like this.
Yeah. Well, Nick, you're highly engaging and it's such a fascinating story, but we're nearly out of time. So this would actually be a good segue to fast forward to, where you're at now. And if you were to give, and we love closing out on this as well, is sharing some key bits of advice, maybe even advice that you would give yourself as a new CFO 5 years ago, knowing what you know now, and any other key pointers for senior finance leaders as they're navigating their career journey. Yeah, would love to hear that.
Yeah, I guess I've probably touched upon some of the themes, but I think the first thing you've got to get right is your team. And having a team that you trust. And, that can be the team that's in place when you arrive as a CFO, if you arrive into a new business, but maybe it's not. And if that's not the first thing that you address, that can sort of be something you're battling against for a long time. So strong piece of advice on when you get into that role is really make sure that you get that team behind you right.
Yep.
Second piece is for me, learning about the business in depth and being able to sell that business, because once you become a more senior person within business, everyone's a salesman. And every event that you go to and every podcast that you do and wherever you might be, you're actually the face of the business and you're selling the business. And that was something that I probably had underestimated when I came into the role, but it's something I've had to learn how to do. And I think it's something that people should have in mind. And if there's even a way for you to start doing that from earlier on, that'd be fantastic.
Yep.
I think don't underestimate the role. If you're a finance person who can sell, wow, that's what a great ability that is, because not every finance person, don't get me wrong, I'm an accountant, but we're not always the most, aggressive salespeople. But I think if you have that ability, that can certainly help
sell,
you out as
to negotiate, to navigate those kind of scenarios. Grow the business.
And then back to my original comments around, just put your hand up and have a crack at everything, even when you get further into your career. Right now, there's opportunities for me. I'm learning about AI. We're building that into our business as every other business around Australia is as well.
Yeah.
I've picked up IT, COSEC pieces, bits and pieces that I didn't have that I've just put my hand up and said, just bring it under me or we'll manage.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing you can take right through your career and keep learning.
Yeah. No, that's great, Nick. We'll be tracking your journey from here on very closely as well. Thank you very much for getting on the podcast and sharing your experiences and story.
Thank you very much. Yeah. That was great.
Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the insights from our network of inspiring finance leaders as they share their journey from Go to CFO. If you're looking to make the next move in your finance career or build your team, get in contact with the team at AXR Recruitment and Search today. We're passionate about building careers, not jobs, teams, not just hires. If you enjoyed the episode, hit the like button and subscribe today. See you next time.